Thomas and Stanley were now great friends. It had been a while since Thomas had his horrible accident, but his good friend Stanley took him to the works to be repaired and repainted. The work on Thomas was almost complete, but he was still feeling quite miserable. He required a few more safety checks before he could go back to work. "Don't worry, Thomas," puffed Stanley. "Soon you'll be back out on the line, and maybe you'll even be stronger than I am." Thomas laughed. He was beginning to feel better. "Fuck's sake," he said. "I was supposed to be taking a goods train across the island today." "I could take the train for you. I'm a very capable engine," boasted Stanley. Thomas was hesitant, but he accepted Stanley's offer to help. "All right then, but be careful, and don't forget your brake van. It's essential." But Stanley chose not to listen to Thomas's advice. "Brake van indeed," Stanley puffed to himself. "I don't need a stupid brake van. I can manage without one." In no time at all, Stanley arrived at the yards, coupled up to Thomas's train. Then, an idea flew into his funnel. "If I shunt this train from the back," he thought, "then I won't need a brake van, and I can show Thomas how strong I really am." With that, Stanley ran round to the back of the train to buffer up, ready to start. The trucks began to giggle. They were all too aware of Stanley's mistake. Soon Stanley set off on the main line to deliver the goods to the other side of the island. He was working very hard and making good time, but it wasn't long before the trucks began to take advantage of him. As Stanley reached the top of Gordon's Hill, the trucks began their silly ways. The slack on their chains tightened, and Stanley's control began to fade. Within seconds, his train began to move faster and faster. On, cackled the trucks, dragging Stanley behind them. The train began to fly down the hill at dangerous speeds. Stanley's wheels struggled to grip the tracks. "Stop, stop," he cried. But the little pricks didn't stop. They continued to rattle and charge forward. "Faster, faster, faster," chanted the trucks. Stanley began to feel his couplings tighten more and more until... With Stanley disconnected from the train, the trucks jumped a set of points and reared onto Thomas's line. Stanley was now stuck between the points, and he could only watch as the trucks went on without him.
Thomas and Friends has always been a show about the engines, the characters, and the world they live in. But you know what? These engines will not be half as memorable or as notable as the troublesome trucks that come along with them. Because after all, a train is only as good as the trucks they pull. And with that, of course, making models and replicas, I'd eventually have to make some rolling stock to go along with them. Our story starts April 16th of 2022. As I'd just been scrolling through Jamos Tranos's very helpful Google Drive folder. He had tankers and clay trucks and vans and wagons of all sorts, but I decided to start off with the simple 7-plank, as it was very simple and, a great rolling stock to start off with. So I ran extremely quickly over to my Ender 330 printer and decided to print out the 7-plank and let that print overnight, and it was gonna be great! I was gonna wake up tomorrow morning very excited to see what the printer had spat out for me, and I could hardly sleep that night. I slept for about 6 of those hours, and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta get up and watch this print. It was amazing. There was 5 hours left, and there was 0 flaws. I was so excited. There was about an hour left into the print, and then something absolutely horrific happened. There I was, just watching the print, and my dog decided to play a quick game of bulldog and ram the leg of my table, my desk. My printer shifted, causing the entire print of the truck to offset. 12 hours thrown straight into the trash. I was furious. But alas, it was still early in the morning, so I decided to quickly reset the printer and have this printer print me a brand new one. And 12 hours later, I got myself a cool body of a 7-plank. And might I add, this 7-plank was crispy clean, man. The level of detail that printed on this, man, this was beautiful. I didn't even need to do any sanding or filling or anything. This was spectacular. I had like 5 trucks lined up on my desk at once, and I didn't even print any bases for them. I didn't print any wheels. I just had truck bodies all over my workstation. So of course, I then decided to print out the remaining parts and stick them all together, but I wanted to paint these trucks in something that represented what I was doing at the time, and still doing, of course, you know, the hit era. The hit era was known for having these wacky colored trucks, but that's exactly what I was going to do. Give my truck a wacky hit era color. But nothing too wacky. I still wanted these to look like sophisticated, grimy pieces of rolling stock. So I opted out on, you know, painting them the nice, I don't even know what kind of blue this is. This is like I don't know what this is. If anyone knows the type of blue this is, tell me in the comments, because it's just a nice blue. It looks great, especially from that one season episode. I think it was like Too Hot Thomas or something. I don't know. And of course, with the idea of mine that I was making these trucks, I was inevitably going to have to make the cream tanker, but that's for another time. I then proceeded to paint the trucks with the blue paint, and then after the blue dried, I gave it the silver detailing of the, what are these, the metal support, spring, whatever the fuck they're called. Might I say, after a little bit of weathering powder, these guys started to look mighty fine. The rolling stock had like this really weird wobble to them. It wasn't very good, but I was proud of them at the time. 2 blue trucks were made, and then the third one was turned into like a regular looking friggin' brown gray truck. Dude, what the hell are these colors, man? I of course had another truck, the first truck that I printed, that messed up. I didn't want to throw away all of this filament in time, so my boy Toughword had the bright idea of making this a covered wagon. It was a brilliant idea, honestly. It was really cool, because I just added these weird cardboard cubes and then went to my local Walmart and grabbed some green cloth and a little bit of twine, and I decided to, you know, cover up the cardboard boxes I made, and then bam, we got a covered wagon. Pretty clean in my opinion. While all of that was happening, I quickly decided to print out the startings of the cream tanker that's in the consist, because I had my heart set on making this. By now, the line of cars I had made it was long. It was real long. I was kind of in love with the idea of having the other regular gray, dirty brown trucks having this weird covered, mysterious load inside of them, so... Whoa, pause. So that's exactly what I did with my other gray truck. And at that point, the truck was completed, so I decided to show it off. It wasn't anything necessarily special, but it was still pretty nice to look at. And I guess that's where that ends. The story pretty much ends there. Until I moved to Arizona. Much like what happened to Emily, happened to pretty much every last one of my pieces of rolling stock. Most of them were badly warped and terribly damaged, but the only one that managed to survive was the cream tanker. But you know what they say, when one door closes, another one opens. It wasn't until a few months till I decided to pick back up where I left off and completely restart with the whole Gauge 1 rolling stock thing. So now, bearing the knowledge that I had, I decided to charge forth into battle and start creating rolling stock. But now, over a year later, I've gained new knowledge and I started designing new axle boxes, again designed by J. Trados, and I modified them to accommodate the new bearings that would be within these axle boxes. I made a set, I want to say, of 2 salt vans. I made 4 more 7-planks. Of course, I remade the blue ones that I had made over a year ago, and I of course made the washed out green ones that you would see in, I guess, almost every season past season 3. Aside from the aesthetic details, the technical details of these rolling stocks were a lot more complex than what I've made previous. I 3D printed these tubes that would encase the brass axles and would pretty much act as a guide to hold the wheels straight, and the ends would pop out the front face of the wheels and slide onto the bearings, and man, would I tell you, these trucks are so smooth. They run like they're sliding on hot melted butter on a glass sheet going down a 45-degree angle. I'm telling you, man, these things are butter smooth. A major improvement from what I made before. I believe that the Salt Van files were actually made by Jack's Replicas, and they're based off of the 10 Mile ones, so I'm gonna hold it to them that these are accurate. These are actually new, more detailed 7-plank files. Don't remember who made them, but I had these files for a very long time. I did end up not wanting the second Salt Van, so I ended up, painting it in a custom color with a few details on the sides and send it up to my boy Tuffy because, he wants rolling stock. Alright, it's been long enough. Now I can finally talk about my favorite pieces of rolling stock. Tankers. Typically my favorite tankers, as you guys seen before, was the cream tankers and the raspberry tankers, but those are very specific resin type of tankers that, they don't exist yet. For now, I made 3 tankers that I really want to talk about. Covey, aka Thomas Modeler, specializes in making these vacuum-formed plastic kits of existing 10-mile rolling stock parts, right? And of course, one of those is tankers. Luckily, Models Thomas, aka Wooden Railway Thomas Models on Twitter, with those 2 that he sent, I proceeded to make them into milk tankers. I chose milk tankers because very hit era. You always see in milk tankers being carried around by the dozens in the hit era, and tar tankers are really overdone. So, stand out, I guess. The first course of action was printing out the rest of the remaining body parts that this tanker was gonna need. Covey's tanker kits came with the 2 ends, the PVC pipe that makes up the main body, and the riveting details that you have to wrap around it. The kits also came with the tank caps that would go on top of the tankers, and the details that would go on the sides of the main body, chassis? I don't know what these are called. You know what I'm talking about, this. I was then gifted with the amazing STL files from the LBSC Thomas, aka Noah, of these amazingly wonderful buffers that look a little more accurate to the ones that they used on the show. So, thanks Noah. I then proceeded to print out the base of the tanker, the actual part that holds the tank in place, this little piece, yeah, right there. Printed out the wheels and the axle boxes and the brakes that were needed for the details. The little bits that strapped down the tanker were then cut out of styrene strips, and this was a black wire. And I'm just that type of guy. I'm getting a little fancy here. The bars that hold the end braces to the frame of the body is actually brass rods. I'm just that type of guy. The entire tanker was put together in these parts, and my God, this is looking crazy. I just love the way tankers look. They're a very unique shape for rolling stock. Everything else is just all boxy, while these guys are just doing their own thing. After everything was then put together, the entire thing was primed in gray, and the entire bottom half of it was painted in black. The tank, on the other hand, was entirely painted in white. After the tankers were then painted in white, here came the hardest part. Putting the milk lettering on the side. I used my Cricut cutter and cut out a graphic design of the Tidmouth Milk logo that would be then applied to the side of the tanker, sprayed on with blue, and voila, the milk tanker was 90% complete. They were looking pretty clean, if I do say so myself, and by far my favorite piece of rolling stock. Again, it's just, milk tankers look really cool to me. But of course I wasn't done yet. I had to give them a little bit of weathering. Now the weathering on these types of rolling stock was a little bit different, as they weren't filthy, because they're white tankers. They had like rain marks and dried up liquids on top. Like, it's hard to explain, but you can see the weathering details that I added, and it really brings together the whole look. And at that point, my milk tankers were done. I was absolutely blown away that I was able to pull off something like this, and it was pretty good looking thing. But it doesn't end there. A few weeks go by, and a third tanker was then sent my way. This one, I wasn't feeling up for it to make another milk tanker. A third milk tanker would have pretty much been overdoing it. So I had to make a tanker that's pretty common around Sodor. And no, it wasn't a tar tanker. Tar tankers are so overdone. I'm not doing a tar tanker. What does this look like? I'm doing an oil tanker. This one was by far much simpler than making another milk tanker, as it's only one solid color, which, you know, is black. Whoa! The build process was essentially the same for this tanker as well as the ones before it, and I had everything put together and primed this thing in gray. After it was primed in gray, it was pretty much sprayed entirely in black Rust-Oleum paint because, again, it's just one solid color. It was given a matte clear, and then I Cricut cut out a logo of the word oil and slapped it onto the side of the tanker. And then after some airbrush weathering and a little bit of powders to give it that nice dirty rustic look to make it not just solid black, the oil tanker was done. I now had 3 tankers in my lineup, and it was amazing. It was great. I love these guys. Okay, and that summarizes pretty much all the rolling stock I've made so far. But for now, that's all I have to offer. And like I said in my last video before this, that Thomas was repainted into the Perspex model rather than his brass model counterpart. And he's gonna appear again in this video. I would like to say that this is the last time this model of Thomas is going to ever be in any of my videos. So I want you guys to take this last piece of him in, you know? Enjoy him. Because after this, he's going away for a little while. And if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you already know what the deal is. But if you don't, then, well, I shan't say any more, or I'll ruin the next story.
Meanwhile, Thomas was back in working order and was on his branch line pulling Annie and Claire. The 3 were having a wonderful time when suddenly they heard some very mischievous laughter accompanied by pounding on the rails. "Cinders and ashes!" shouted Thomas as he slammed on his brakes and began to puff back quickly. The train bashed into Thomas's newly mended buffer beam. It was up to Thomas to stop the troublesome trucks. Thomas pushed back against the trucks and they ground to a halt. "Now where did you little arseholes come from? Were you part of my train that Stanley took? Well, never mind. Let's go and find your lost engine." "Missing something?" Thomas teased cheekily. "Let's get you back on the rails and get these goods delivered." Soon, Stanley was indeed back on the rails and coupled to the train. In the end, Stanley knew that he wasn't as clever as he first thought, but he did know that it was a very fucking stupid idea indeed.